Hello, welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's the Monday show with me, Andrew Musgrove, and I'm joined by our chief Newcastle United writer, Lee Ryder. Plenty to talk about in the world of Newcastle United. A busy weekend for Lee, and we're going to dive into the stories that he broke over the last couple of days. First things first, Lee, welcome back to the show. How are you keeping? You had a good weekend, Newcastle aside?
Yeah, I mean, it's been more World Cup, hasn't it? England got there at the end on Saturday. But yeah, it is worrying what's going on with Newcastle, but it is also still early days. So we try, as always, to lean on the positive side.
Yeah, well, we're going to dive straight into the big story that broke over the weekend via yourself, all about the transfer budget. And you wrote over on chroniclelive.co.uk that Newcastle United and Eddie Howe have the smallest summer transfer kitty that he, i.e. Eddie Howe, has had at his disposal since taking over as manager, unless the club sells more of its stars. And understandably, I guess, from a fan's point of view, that has got quite a few people worried. I guess the first question is, how small is small?
Well, let's kind of go back first to David Hopkinson's briefing up at St James's Park during the March international break, where he said that at that point Newcastle had 7 games left and they were working on 2 or 3 different scenarios, depending on whether they got into Europe or one European competition or another, or didn't get into Europe at all. Well, we now know fine well Newcastle won't be in Europe. They are going to be operating with the smallest of those 3 pots that were mentioned. You also have to factor in Newcastle do have a UEFA fine coming up in the post, which is obviously going to have to come from somewhere. And Newcastle have limited funds. How small is small? Well, it's always difficult to put an exact figure on it, but you know, they put the bid in for Muniz at 34 million. But after that, I think had that deal gone through, then I think another sale would be required. You look at Tonali is up for sale. That would bring in enough money to buy another couple of players. And we wait to see what happens with Bruno.
When I read the story, I have to say, speaking as a fan, the first thing that jumped into my head is that I think pretty much the majority of Newcastle United supporters agree there was a big shopping list this summer for Newcastle United, a minimum of 5, maybe 6 players. And I think that's potentially before we start talking about exits, just to try and improve the first team. They are dealing with the smallest budget Eddie Howe has had since he's taken over as manager. That is a massive concern and worry, isn't it? Because there is a massive rebuilding job to be done, and yet they don't have the money to do it.
Yeah, I mean, go back again to David Hopkinson's briefing in March. He said Newcastle are going to have to get better at trading. And he also, I said it to him. I said, this club needs a marquee signing going into next season. And he said, well, we can do that, but we're going to have to sell in order to do that. So I think there was always going to be a case where it was going to be a bit of wheeling and dealing. I think they can make 4 or 5 signings, but I would expect a couple of departures as well.
Obviously, we've had Anthony Gordon going out and Munoz, whoever comes in, would be his replacement. But we spoke last week about where else they need. Ideally, you'd want a number 1 coming in, so that, might mean Nick Pope goes, probably would mean that. But then you would need another one coming in to make sure you've got 3 senior goalkeepers there. Right back, you've already lost Kieran Trippier, Emil Kraft, Tino Livramento's injury record is one to be concerned about. Cover at left back. I think there are certain positions in this Newcastle United squad where you could see someone going and then being replaced. However, when you look at left back, for example, there's no one to get rid of to bring another one in, yet they do need body there.
Yeah.
Like, do you look at the positions in which do need strengthening? Are you a little bit concerned that, given the lack of budget, that Newcastle United might not get done what they actually need to do?
Yeah, I think they will get where they need to be by the end of the window. What won't happen is they're not going to make the quick start that Eddie Howe pretty much, he didn't demand it, but he said he would like it in his last press conference before the final game of the season. Is it ideal? No, but Newcastle have kind of not brought on themselves, but when they didn't get into Europe, there was always going to be trouble. And I think that's now sort of, coming into effect.
Well, speaking of that, and this leads into, again, the question over Eddie Howe, David Hopkinson, as you said European qualification is the ambition. We know for the bigger picture and for Newcastle to achieve everything that they've set out to achieve, even forgetting about the 2030 vision, just being at the top table, they need European football consistently. They did not get it. Now, they've backed Eddie Howe to be the manager next season, fair enough, but we are now starting to feel the effects of a lack of European football. And some people would say, well, where's the accountability for that?
Yeah, I mean, Newcastle haven't done any sort of big interviews yet. I mean, I suppose they'll feel that they don't have anything to fully talk about. I mean, you can't really explain a transfer window in the first few weeks of it. All they can say is keep sending the message out. Let's not try to panic. Let's stick to the programme. What I have been told from up high is Newcastle have got a plan, they've got a strategy, and they're trying to stick to it. And I would say that means more players are going to be sold. So, look, if the Muniz deal had been done and they got that one over the line, then I think we'd be sitting here now feeling a lot more comfortable. Instead, we're kind of a bit twitchy, aren't we? And we know that if things stayed like this going into the start of pre-season, which isn't that far away, that squad is going to look threadbare, especially with all the World Cup participants.
Yeah, it's a fickle game, football, isn't it? And on Eddie Howe again, he's under huge pressure. There's no getting away from it. There's still a section of the fan base who think he shouldn't be in charge come the new season. Penny for his thoughts in terms of strengthening the squad, because it was felt last season that the depth wasn't really there. They couldn't handle going in all these competitions, and when injuries strike, they haven't really got the players to deal with that. Some might argue that they haven't got the players to just kind of change it up when necessary. If he's sitting there now, and again, you mentioned the fact that for what now, the fourth year in a row, he's always said, I want players in early, and again, he hasn't got that. How do you think he's feeling right now? Because if we're looking at this squad list going, we need X, Y, Z to come in here, this needs to be improved, and then obviously your story about the lack of budget, I mean, he mustn't be feeling too comfortable with the current situation, right?
I don't think he'll be delighted, but by the same token, we've mentioned there, it's not the first time, so he's used to it. He's used to almost this kind of dealing with a crisis. That's how he earns his money, basically. And he'll probably try to, if nothing happens in the next 10 days, which I really hope does happen, then he'll probably try and tilt in a different way. From his point of view, he's got to get a squad together. He'll probably look at some of the younger players. I think he's going to look at some of the younger players anyway in the early part of pre-season. And he'll try and work with some of the players that he's got. But look, is Eddie Howe under pressure? He'll say he's always under pressure. Every day you walk up to the job at Newcastle United, you walk to St James Park, you see the enormity of it. I walked past it on my way to work this morning, and there's people around the ground going in the club shop. The expectation is massive, and he won't need reminding that the pressure is there, but the pressure's always on every day.
Do you think, and again, it's maybe not the right time to ask this question, but I'll do it anyway. Do you think he will be knocking on the door, or picked up the phone to Ross Wilson, Dave Hopkinson, saying, "Come on, you've got to give me the players that I need to turn this around"?
Yeah, 100%. I think Eddie Howe will have his phones laid out like we've got them now. He won't be sitting back and reading a magazine and sitting in the garden. Absolutely no chance, because that's not in his nature. He'll keep pushing, and I think he'll have targets in mind who he wants, but he'll also be open to targets that Ross Wilson will put. It'll be a combined effort, and let's just hope that they can get the positions filled that they need. That's what he said to me at Fulham. We've got a lot of positions to fill this summer, and so far they've only managed to fill one of them. So
I guess, and you've kind of alluded to it there, there'll be a lot of emphasis on Eddie Howe working with the players he's got, and people will be looking at Johan Wissa scoring a double in the last game in the World Cup, Anthony Elanga as well, performing really well. There is a chance there, isn't there, to work with those two in particular when they do get back from the World Cup, and them to become the stars that we thought Newcastle United had bought last summer.
Yeah, and I think he even dropped a little hint about that towards the end of the season. There will be players going into the second season. They'll be better for it. They'll be better for the adversity of last season. I think Wissa finished last season. He was just sort of coming back into fitness. He missed some big chances, but I think had the season ran on 2 or 3 weeks more, we might have seen more from him. Walter Marder, we know, is a good player anyway. Hasn't had his chance at the World Cup. And Elanga in fantastic form, showing what he can do. We've seen bits of that last season at the new camp where he got his couple of goals. There's every chance that they could have a good start to the new season. So let's it's not all bad news.
No, not at all. And it's great to see the likes of Elanga and Wissa performing well, although I think Wissa's first hour wasn't exactly great. He didn't half put some chances where they shouldn't have gone. But Elanga particularly, people who watch the podcast know that I went all out from last summer, still stand by the fact that there's a great player in there. But I do worry slightly about the difference in styles. Like, Sweden, the way they play compared to the way Newcastle played last season is very, very different. Do you feel like Eddie Howe can adapt to suit Elanga, or is Elanga not a big enough name, a big enough player to have that luxury to get the best out of him? Because it's difficult, isn't it? If you're Valdemar, you can I think there's a bigger case to say, change your system to suit the big German, because I think he will score your goals, he'll bring you assists. With Elanga, it's different, and really there's only one style that suits him, and that's not the style Newcastle put out last season, and it's probably not the style that Eddie Howe will want to take into the next campaign. So what happens with Elanga?
Yeah, well, they need to play with strengths. For me, last season they didn't get, when he did play, he didn't get him on the ball enough. It's a bit like Anthony Gordon at the World Cup. He's been getting pelters, but I watched the England-Croatia game and I had a keen eye on what Gordon was doing, and he was making the runs and he was demanding the ball and he wasn't getting it. So if your teammates aren't giving you what you need, then you're not going to be able to put on your best show. And I think that's certainly the case with Elanga. So I think you're right to not sort of give up on him, because he is a type of player. We've seen it in Nottingham Forest, how good he is. He can cause devastation to defences, but you've got to get him on the ball. And I think Newcastle need to look at that. And hopefully there can be some, understanding with the likes of Walter and Wissa between the three, because it could be a good trio for Newcastle. They paid enough money in them. Don't give up on them now. Yeah,
and I guess we have to keep everything crossed that they can be a good trio given the budget. A lot of people will be asking a couple of questions following on from your story about how Newcastle United find themselves in this position with such a limited budget, given there was a record fee for Alexander Isak. Champions League revenue, we know commercial revenue's grown as well. Off the field, there are reasons to celebrate. The work that's been done and growing that revenue is something to shout about. I guess maybe the answer is it's not enough though.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's been a tricky sort of few weeks, hasn't it? And I mean, what should have happened in the last 2 weeks hasn't happened, which is getting Muniz through the door and a right back. So for me, you look at where they go from here, they're just going to have to dust themselves down. And I think they're well aware as well, Newcastle, that other teams are going to make it awkward. They've got two things going on at the minute. They've got teams trying to take players, and they've got the targets. They're getting big fees lumped up. Now, if you're a big club, you've got to deal with that. But I think for me, it's been a tough 2 weeks, but they've got to go again.
Is it a case that we're now seeing last summer come back to bite Newcastle in many ways? We've just said there that hopefully those three that we've mentioned in terms of Valdemar, Wissa and Elanga can come good and prove their price tag worthy. But right now, the fact that the budget is so small, is it a knock-on effect of what they spent last summer in terms of that 250 million quid? And really, no one would have predicted Newcastle being in a position where you could argue that that they need to bring in a new right winger, they need to bring in a new centre forward, because they spent all that money last summer with the hope, obviously, that they would hit the ground running and produce 30 goals between them.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the fact that last summer they spent, what, 240 million in the end. I remember asking someone in a high place at Newcastle, have you got another 240 million to throw into it? And there was a firm shake of the head. So it's not going to be, they cannot just pick it up and run with it, if that's the right term. They've got to be creative, and that means someone else is gonna have to go after Gordon, which is unfortunate, but that's football, really. All the top clubs trade. I mean, look at Chelsea; they almost stockpiled players, didn't they, and ended up, selling them. But they always seem to have money to spend, and Newcastle's got to get closer to where these clubs are, or they're going to be in trouble.
But it's selling, say, Sandro Tonali for £100 million to Spurs enough? Will it stop there? Do you think, given the work that they need to do to improve the first team?
I couldn't sit here now and guarantee that Bruno will stay. I certainly can't stand here and say Sandro Tonali is going to stay, because that one's already in an advanced stage. Both players could go. Let's be honest about it. Let's be brutally honest. Both players could be sold, because if it gets to a point where, this is the key part for me, if it gets to the point where Bruno's head is turned, he'll go. And that's not a slight on him. He's been brilliant for Newcastle. But if someone turns around, like an Arsenal, says, we can give you Champions League football, we can give you more money, we can give you the sign-on fee, we can give you the security of a longer contract, then Newcastle can't defend against that. If it hits a certain point, a tipping point, which we spoke about yesterday in the article, if that tipping point happens, then for me, I fear Bruno could be gone. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that, because we've already seen it with Isak. There's a price for every player, but it'll be on Newcastle's terms. And at the minute, we are hearing he's not for sale, but every player's for sale. And we know that. It doesn't matter which club you are. Someone comes in and puts down an astronomical bid, you're going to take it and reinvest that money. So I do fear, there could be at least 2 more big name departures, maybe more. But what we're looking at is who comes in to replace them, because that's the important thing at Newcastle.
In those big name departures, is it a case that this is just football? Sandro Tonali wants to move to Spurs because it's London, or of course because it's a pay rise, rather than, and this is a fear that some fans have, that the project has kind of totally fallen the wind, and players are looking at it and thinking, well, which direction is the club heading in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't fully buy into the fact that it's a completely negative narrative, because this team, even under Eddie Howe, it's reinvented itself more than once. We'll have that season in 2024 where there were a few home truths. Newcastle didn't qualify for Europe in the end. They finished 7th. They were unlucky. They didn't get there because Man United won the cup. But that team then went away and reinvented itself and went again and finished 5th and got into the Champions League once again. Obviously, won a trophy as well. Last season wasn't good enough. Everyone will admit that. And Newcastle finishing 12th, nowhere near where they should be. But doesn't mean that they can't go again in pre-season, have a crack at it, have a good start of the season, as hard as it's going to be, given the kindness of the fixture list that we've seen the other day. But you've got to have the right players, and you've got to bring in 4 or 5. And if that happens, then I think it could be a reset.
Just going back to the number there, the 4 and 5, is that a case in your mind the budget is there for those 4 and 5, or is it a case that, because again, I go back to the fact that they need cover at left back or they need a right back, but no one's going to go out from those positions to cover it. And even if you sell Sandro Tonali, to replace him, you're probably looking at half, if not more, of what you get for him. And then obviously not everything goes into the pot as well. So where are we in terms of, I guess, the priority positions and your story about, one would have to go for more money to come into the pot?
They can't do, as it stands, they can't just go out and sign 5 players. Someone needs to go first. They've got one player through the door, the goalkeeper, but they need, to fill those other positions. They can't do it unless somebody else goes. They can maybe get one in without someone going, but then after that, someone else is going to have to go. So for me, it's a tricky situation, but they're going to have to get through it. It's as simple as that.
A lot of people, maybe skeptically, have said, is this just kind of a warning to selling clubs? Newcastle United want to put it out there. They don't actually have a lot of money, when maybe in the shadows they have a little bit more money than they're letting on. I mean, I guess that's all part and parcel of just transfer window in football, isn't it? You're not going to tell people how much you've got to spend.
No, you're not. No, and you wouldn't have a running tally like, some kind of lottery fund, what the jackpot's sitting on or anything like that. It's not like that. It's more Newcastle looking after their own interests. They're not going to go and broadcast who they're going to sign, but everyone does know that they do need to sell players because they have. That's one thing they have admitted publicly. David Hopkinson said it, didn't he? That we're going to have to sell to buy, but we're not going to sell. We're not going to sell on anyone's terms but our own. And if Newcastle can pick up, a big fee for Tonali, look, I don't know. I'll ask you, if you had 100 million on the table for Tonali now, would you be tempted with that?
No, 100%. I think his head has been turned, so there's no point keeping an unhappy player at Newcastle United, and that fee of £100 million hopefully would allow you to invest in maybe two or three players, which has to be the hope. And I've got on record and said how good of a player I think Tonali is, but I'd rather keep Bruno than Tonali. And yeah, £100 million, of course you're not going to turn that down.
It's just too much of a temptation, and if Spurs want to pay that, it's almost be our guest, really, because I think Newcastle can get somebody else in. Tonali's had a good time at Newcastle, but he's never ever turned around and said, I want to stay here and I'm committed. He even got asked, would he go? And basically he kind of opened the door to it, didn't he? That's why Newcastle have barely put him up for an interview with the written press, because they know he's going to get asked about his future. And the one time that he did go in front of the written press, he got asked about his future, and he basically opened the door to an exit. And then his agents, being out saying, that was always a plan to come here and use Newcastle as a stepping stone. So he's doing his job, by the way. But 100 million for me, if that opens if that is the gateway to Newcastle signing two or three more players, I'm all for it.
Let us know in the comments your thoughts on that. A big thanks to Sealy, our sponsors of the Everything is Black and White podcast. If you're about to jet away on your summer holidays and want to ensure that you stay connected, you can pick up a discount on your eSIM by clicking the link in the podcast description box. 200 destinations to choose from at affordable prices. And a big thanks as well to NordVPN, our sponsors, who allow you to browse safely on public Wi-Fi. One subscription can be used across 10 devices. Click the link in the podcast description box. I'm going to dive into the comments because we've got a lot of people watching live. Big thanks to Darren. And Lee, he says, in his opinion, it feels like the PIF have lost interest in the club, which is shown by the lack of movement in the transfer window and delays with the stadium. And I know this is something that comes up pretty much every other week, really. And, obviously, you've gone out and you've asked the question. I mean, it's fair to say they haven't lost interest at all. They are here to stay, and they want to build Newcastle United into the very best that they can do.
Yeah, I think, look, when David Hopkinson got appointed, they wanted Newcastle to be run from St James's Park, which they have been. You can't be kind of running to your financial backers every 2 minutes. They want Newcastle to be self-sufficient, if you like. And you've got your CEO in place now. We didn't have that this time last year. You've got your sporting director in place. Didn't have that last year. So all the key positions are filled, and it's now a case of we judge Newcastle between now and deadline day. So, and I think there's a lot of time to run, really. I mean, you go past Newcastle's stadium at the minute, they're still late. It's the end of June. I know pre-season's around the corner, but it's still very early in the window. And you look at other clubs, some of them have done big deals already, but others are waiting. And I think I don't think the market's really fully kicked into gear just yet.
And the message is, isn't it? Don't panic.
I wouldn't panic yet. I'm not saying don't ever panic, because, we've seen what can happen in football, but it's the 29th of June today. And, while Newcastle Eddie Howe would prefer someone to be with him on the first day of pre-season so they can get the message into the player early on. That's the idea. And there's still a chance, with good 10 days to go, that could happen. There could be one or two new faces through the door the next. It's a big 10 days. That's probably the way to sort of couch it.
Now let's go on to Bruno, because obviously he's been the big story towards the end of the week. You wrote a story over the weekend which said there was no release clause. The reports, I think it was in South America, suggested that it was around £65 million, but that isn't the case.
Yeah, well, that's what we were told yesterday. We checked this out. We've seen the headlines. I think it came from a Brazilian publication saying that there was a 65 million release clause for Bruno. It's since been suggested by others that there's a sort of verbal agreement that if Newcastle gets 65 million, then he goes. But from the Newcastle end, and this is why we do what we do, because we get a balanced. We don't just repeat what's written in Brazil. So from the Newcastle end, they're saying no clause, no activation, no trigger, nothing like that. No bid. And basically they haven't agreed anything so far. Whether the 65 million bid rolls in and that changes the dynamics of it, we have to wait and see. But certainly, one other thing before we go on to the next question, Arsenal certainly have made inquiries through third parties. The suggestion, the opening kind of gambit, if you like, was 45 million, dismissed completely. That's without it being an official bid. Conversation between third parties, which is how it works. Someone says to someone else, would 45 million be tempt Newcastle? They go back and then they say no. So yeah, that's pretty. It's very much like the Isak deal.
Yeah, and we're talking there about Newcastle's stance. He's not for sale, and that's brilliant. He's the captain. I mean, what he would lose in terms of that passion, commitment, and leadership was just it's scary to think. But the contract situation is something that we've spoken about over the last month or so. I mean, you, well before I think the season ended, flagged it up and said, if he doesn't go to the World Cup with a new contract and then has a belt at World Cup, then that's really going to come to a head. Two questions. I mean, first, do you think that there is a price tag that might move Newcastle United? I mean, we're talking 115 at least for Anderson. We're talking 100 million for Tonali. It's really difficult to put a price tag on Bruno, because what you would lose in terms of the captain and then obviously the footballer.
Yeah, well, you've got to look at his age. So he's 29 next birthday, which in football terms, you are going into your peak years at that age. He's got only 2 years left of his current deal. So if he doesn't sign another contract, valuation is going down. So this is probably a high point where Newcastle could command a big fee and make a profit on Bruno. Now, is he too important to sell? He's a club captain. He's, you see kids buying the shirt, and I think if any player gets sold who would break hearts, probably be Bruno. He's such a big part of the club. But again, if the fee is right and it makes sense and you can reinvest it, then it's going to be looked at. But at the minute, Newcastle's stance is clear. He's not for sale. Now, tactically, that could be not for sale unless you offer us an astronomical amount of money for him. So I don't know. Is £65 million the top kind of book price for Bruno Guimaraes, or could they extract more? I don't know.
Let us know your value.
Would you take
Bruno.
65 million?
No, I wouldn't. I get, if you look at it from a non-Newcastle United point of view, and you put everything on the table that you've said there, contract, age, then I can see why 65, 70 million might be acceptable to some, but what you would lose because he is a fantastic captain. And I know this doesn't work in terms of placing a valuation on it. It's more how it affects Newcastle's stance. The impact of losing Bruno Guimaraes in terms of the mood, which is already so low, like it has to be an astronomical price, even just to pick.
So what's your tip? What's your tipping point?
I think 100 million. I think would be. Million. I think it would be there. I don't think Newcastle would get that because I don't think Arsenal would go for that. And I saw a tweet earlier that spelled out that I think the youngest midfielder they've got is 27, 28 already. Yeah. So already there's questions about Arsenal's approach to this. Great player, but actually he's going to go into a pool of players who aren't going to be here long term because they're already closer to 30. But you know, some people would say in terms of the contract situation, if he is to get a new deal, Newcastle United would likely have to break their wage structure. You would think, going above £200,000. Go back to the story that you've written about the budget. You know, are Newcastle United in a position where they can afford to give Bruno Guimaraes a contract and a pay rise, which keeps them happy at Newcastle, but doesn't then impact the rest of the work they've got to do in the transfer market?
Well, this is the other issue. If let's say they do offer Bruno 200k a week, then you've got somebody else knocking on the door saying, "Well, I want that, and I want that." And if that pollutes the mood in the dressing room, which was pretty bad last season, let's be totally honest, for whatever reason, if that causes disruption there, then that's not a good thing. So yeah, I mean, really, whatever Bruno asked for in the contract talks, he obviously hasn't got it. So because he's gone to the World Cup without signing a new deal. So I'm not sure he can get 200k a week at Newcastle.
Do you think there's been any encouragement from maybe Bruno's side? Because a lot of people are saying, well, you know, okay, you've verbally offered 45 million. 2 days later, you come back with 60, 65, whatever it was, or 55. You know, would you do that if there wasn't some encouragement somewhere? And I think it's probably important as well, as you've already done, to establish the difference between an agent and a third party, because it's not like Bruno's agent has picked up the phone up. We don't think and encouraging it. It's come through a third party. But do you think there has been some encouragement somewhere? And I guess how much weight does that carry on Arsenal's next move?
I think encouragement from Arsenal to Bruno's people, 100%, because I wouldn't be getting the information that I've been getting, and believe me, it's not coming from other journalists or anything. It's coming from a good place, and Newcastle they're aware of how it works. But there's all I'll kind of say, without sort of giving too much away, is that when Bruno come to Newcastle, we got him. We kind of gazumped a lot of clubs. Nobody expected it to happen when it did, and I think Amanda Staveley was kind of influential in it, drove Newcastle forward on that, and we gazumped a lot of clubs. Arsenal were one of those clubs. Arsenal were very much in the mix for Bruno, and probably would have went from the next window after when we got him in the winter window. So let's just say that there's a lot of relationships in the Bruno camp have been established well before now. So they've always had options, and they can tilt. And I think we're now seeing that. And Bruno's always said that he wants to play in Europe. He wants Newcastle to be at the top, and that's kind of how we've kept him. But now we've just finished 12th. We're not in Europe. We are in a tricky position.
And obviously, I mentioned this in an episode with Gibbo last week. Bruno at Fulham caused a little bit of concern within the fan base. He didn't look happy, and I think you could see that he didn't look happy kind of in the few games before that, because he, for me, was the only one that was really giving his all. He was the one that was looking like he was trying to do something, and there was no one around. And I go back to the point I've made quite a few times, that how can a player miss 14 games, return to the side for what was, I don't know what it was, a couple of months, and still be if not player of the year, came in second behind Lewis Hall. Like, that is a massive red flag towards the rest of the squad, that a player was out for so much time and yet not a single other person stepped up to not necessarily replace him, but to up their game. And I guess fill the void that he left through injury. And I do worry about his happiness. Is he asking questions about why aren't any of you coming up to my level and helping this club? And he talked there about European football. And look, Arsenal just won the Premier League title.
It's got to be a temptation for any player.
And I think that's the reality that we're facing. And it feels like Newcastle are in a horrible position, because we talk about their, Bruno will come back from the World Cup. He might ask for a new contract. As people might say, he wants a pay rise. But also, you'll probably want to see, well, more certainly you'll want to see ambition in the transfer market. But we've spoken about that. Can they do both? And even if they offer him a new deal, we're talking about the small budget. Like, it just feels like a really difficult place Newcastle are in, because can they do both? Can they match his ambition in terms of bringing the right players in to build Newcastle into a force again, while also giving him the pay rise that he most probably will want when he gets back?
Yeah, well, that's just it, isn't it? And when he got injured, I think it was at Spurs, the hamstring, he's obviously come out of the team, and the team he returned to was in a different place completely. When he got the injury, we were still in contention for getting into Europe. We were still in the Champions League. When he come back, we'd obviously been, dumped out of the Champions League, and we're well off the pace. We did rally a little bit to go into the last couple of games in contention, scraping something, but the whole thing was just so flat, and it was the crowd, made the disappointment clear, and it just means things can only get better, really, on the pitch. But but they need to do something. Something needs to move.
Do you have confidence? And I've gone on this pod many times and said I have full confidence in Ross Wilson, David Hopkinson to do the job. It hasn't started brilliantly this window, but I think by the end of the window we should be sitting pretty, because these are two men with big reputations, good CVs. They're not here to be made a fool of because it's their reputation on the line. Do you have confidence that Bruno gets sold, or well, not Bruno, sorry, Tonali rather gets sold for £100 million, that money will be invested in the right way, and we won't? And again, it's very easy to say this, but we'll not be sitting here next summer looking back on this summer going, oh, 3 big money signings have flopped again.
Yeah, well, time will tell is probably the best way for me to look at it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and go, I don't trust him, because you've got to give people the opportunity to perform. And as I say, it is the 29th of June at the minute. I'm certainly not going to judge it on the back of one, attempt to sign a quality, fully fledged Spanish international, which, they got pipped by Liverpool. And, we're talking about all these third parties getting involved. That's exactly what happened with Muniz. Iriola got involved. His people got involved. And the next thing, the lure of Liverpool became too much, and we missed out. But he'd agreed, personal terms, the contract was agreed, the price tag was agreed, it was all ready to go. But unfortunately, Liverpool came in, and you're dealing in such a demand and competitive world, and Newcastle aren't in the best position where they're fully equipped financially at the minute.
A couple of players they have been linked to, Joan Manzambi, Swiss international, 20 years of age, at Freiburg currently, £42 million. A lot of people are excited by this one. And what's your understanding when it comes to that name?
Yeah, I think it's a player Newcastle have looked at, but as it stands, we've checked it this morning, nothing, no bid at the minute, no approach just yet. And it's just another name that's, been thrown in there. But have they looked at him? Yes. It's not completely false, but in terms of where the transfer's at, Newcastle at the minute playing that one down. We
mentioned Nusa last week, and how Newcastle I've watched him, and could get him for I think it was 43 million in the end. But reports over the last couple of days have suggested that his teammate Diamandi, who Liverpool wanted, has now chosen PSG. So the strong likelihood is that he's going to leave maybe this summer. Do you think that potentially impacts the chase for Nusa?
Well, again, it's money talks, doesn't it? If you put the required offer down, then you've got a chance of getting him. It's as simple as that. He'd be a great signing for Newcastle, but again, another player they're interested in, and the process has got to keep rolling on for Newcastle to push on and buy someone, and that very much includes somebody being sold.
I'm just going to read a comment that got emailed in a moment, but just the penultimate question, Lee. We've mentioned that obviously limited budget, they need to work on 5 or 6. Right now, if you could click your fingers and then spend whatever limited budget they've got on one position, I'm not necessarily asking you to pick a player to fill that position, but that one position, where would it be?
Well, bearing in mind that we're probably going to lose Tonali and could lose Bruno, then I'd probably be looking in the centre of the park. And midfield general to come in and really boost everything for Newcastle. So, yeah, on the basis that we're going to lose those, could lose one of those, could lose both. But let's say we lose both, then you're definitely going to need a central midfielder. So, but I think they need a new central midfielder anyway. So that's where I'd go, the middle of the park.
Okay, let us know your thoughts on that. I think a number 6 for me is absolutely crucial. And actually, I don't know, I've asked you this because, again, people who listen to the podcast know that I've been banging on about number 6 for God knows how long. Is that something you think Eddie Howe would bring in? Because we know he likes to be fluid, doesn't he? He likes that versatility. And that's often one of the comments I get thrown back as well. Actually, Eddie Howe doesn't really like the pigeonhole players. But I don't know about you. Last season, did you watch Newcastle and think at the very least they need someone a bit more defensive-minded with that discipline in that kind of centre role?
You know what? I always think back to the kind of Keegan era, and for all Kevin Keegan got stick about, playing attacking football, one position he always tried to get sorted was that kind of anchor man in midfield, and he went out and got Paul Bracewell at the start of the whole Entertainers era. Such a, not an underrated signing, but one that doesn't get shouted about, and Bracewell come in and he was the anchor to that first promotion. And then he probably did it a bit too late, but he went out and got David Batty, didn't he, in 1996? And maybe if that signing had happened at some other stage, that would have made the Entertainers a lot more sturdy than they were. So for me, that position, that 6, it's always a key position to get sorted. I'm sure Eddie Howe has similar thoughts.
It's a hard position to fill, isn't it? As we've seen, because Bruno and Tonali have alternated, but neither are a traditional number 6 and seem to have that kind of discipline to stick. So my priority would be an actual out-and-out number 6 defensive midfielder, but we'll wait and see what happens. And the final question, someone actually in the comments to one of your stories, wrote a nice long comment with plenty of questions, but it's the last bit that is it's got my intrigue. And the person asks, do you think we'll get anyone speaking on the record, because they feel that we need to know our direction of travel from those with power, and in their opinion, they are anonymous right now. So do you think now is the right time for Ross Wilson or Dave Hopkinson to come out and just explain things? Because I'm sure they are well aware, and they probably feel it too. The optics right now it's not a good fan base to be part of. Everyone is feeling very negative, and we can sit here and say, judge them at the end of the window, and that's definitely the mindset that I'm under. Don't panic right now. But from a fan point of view, I can totally understand why people are looking at it, and I don't actually think they're panicking, Lee. I think they're just looking at it and thinking, well, oh well, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Do you think we need something from someone on a high level just to say, look, we're going to stand. Last season wasn't great. Trust us, the summer window is going to be good, and next season we'll kick on.
The problem there is that let's say they did do that. I mean, not quite keen at the top of the steps kind of thing, but let's say they do that, then they're just going to get loads of people saying we need action, not words. So I don't think that'll happen. I don't think you'll hear from David Hopkinson. I don't think you'll hear from Ross Wilson either. I think the next time you'll hear from someone will be Eddie Howe at Gateshead first friendly. Whether he does some kind of club TV piece first, we'll have to wait and see. But he's never gonna be grilled by club channels. I mean, not that we're going down to Gateshead to grill him, but he'll be fully aware that he's going to get asked tough questions. It'll be a little huddle, I would say, at Gateshead, and that will be the first official words from Eddie Howe this summer.
And again, it goes back to what we've kind of been saying throughout the pod. They need some positive news. They need a signing, because even just one changes the dynamic of that huddle, doesn't it? So hopefully next time we do hear from Eddie Howe, there's more than one signing through the door, but we'll wait and see on that. Do head over to chroniclelive.co.uk to follow all things that Lee writes about Newcastle United. Do hit thumbs up, hit subscribe, get into the comments, and I will catch you guys very soon.